Captured German nurses weren't ready for what they saw behind American medical lines and, frankly, neither were the people who captured them. These were Red Cross nurses trained under the strict ideology of Nazi racial medicine. They had been taught, relentlessly, that racial hierarchy determined who deserved care, that the so-called enemies of the Reich, Jews, Slavs, black people, were biologically inferior and less than human. That medicine was a tool to serve the state, not humanity. Then they were captured, and the moment they crossed into American care, everything they believed about medicine, power, and morality started to crumble.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Because what they found wasn't the chaotic, crumbling mess Nazi propaganda had promised. It was the opposite. American hospitals were overflowing not with suffering, but with supplies, technology, personnel, cleanliness, order, humanity. And if that wasn't enough of a shock, the nurses quickly realized that these hospitals didn't just treat American soldiers. They treated everyone. Poles, civilians, black patients, Jewish patients. The same level of care, the same equipment, the same respect. The indoctrination these women carried into captivity didn't stand a chance against what they were about to witness. Let's back up. During the war, these German Red Cross nurses had been trained in a system that weaponized medicine. Under Nazi rule, healthcare was never about healing, it was about enforcing racial superiority. Scientific knowledge took a backseat to ideology. Treatments were denied based on ethnicity. Medical experiments were conducted in the name of eugenics, and these nurses were fully embedded in that system. So when they were captured and transferred into American medical facilities, the cultural whiplash was immediate. The sheer abundance hit first. Shelves lined with antiseptics, cabinets packed with antibiotics, rooms humming with technology. Equipment that, for many of these women, had only existed in textbooks. Here it was, being used on a daily basis. Penicillin, blood plasma banks, advanced surgical procedures, systematic sterilization. And this wasn't a demonstration for show, it was standard protocol. The American medical system they stepped into was a machine of scientific precision and compassion. It worked, and it worked for everyone. There were no lectures, no propaganda posters, just actions, just outcomes. And that's what made it so powerful. These nurses weren't just seeing impressive treatments, they were watching lives being saved by medicine they had been told was inferior. They saw infections that would have been fatal in Germany cured in days. Limbs that would have been amputated back home were being saved with surgical precision. Patients who would have been discarded in Nazi Germany were being treated with dignity. That's the moment the cracks started to form. Because how do you hold on to an ideology that tells you your enemy is inferior, while watching that enemy outperform your entire medical system? It wasn't just better, it was undeniably superior in both results and ethics. And then came the psychological gut punch: kindness. These same prisoners who had been trained to dehumanize Americans, to see them as crude, racially impure, morally bankrupt, were being offered gifts, cards, packages during the holidays. Christmas, 1943, marked a major emotional break. American staff sent care packages to prisoners, shared food, treated them not just with civility, but with warmth. It was charity, compassion, and it made no sense to these women. Because under the ideology they had been raised in, mercy was weakness, compassion was conditional, humanity was a privilege earned through race and loyalty. Yet here it was given freely, even to them. Then came the bombshell: integrated medical teams. For many of the nurses, nothing challenged their beliefs more than watching African American nurses working side by side with white doctors. Not just tolerated, respected, trusted. They witnessed black nurses caring for German prisoners. They watched American professionals of different races treating patients of all backgrounds. And the care didn't waver. The skill didn't drop. The hierarchy was gone. This destroyed one of the central pillars of Nazi racial doctrine, the idea that competence and morality were tied to race. Gone. These integrated teams proved otherwise in real time, in clean, efficient, professional settings. And the German nurses had no counter-argument, only silence. That silence grew heavier when they realized the American medical advancements they were seeing, many of them had been developed by scientists the Nazis had expelled. Jewish scientists, refugees, names erased from their textbooks. The irony wasn't lost on them. Later, some of the nurses attended educational programs led by American professionals. There, They learned about medical ethics, patient rights, scientific methods, concepts never prioritized in Nazi.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
Institutions. For many, this was the first time they were taught that medicine wasn't about enforcing ideology, but about healing universally. And the lessons weren't abstract. They were backed by the hard truth. The most cutting-edge medical discoveries they now relied on came from people their government had persecuted. That kind of contradiction doesn't go away quietly. It creates a fracture in the soul of an ideology. Through this exposure, day in, day out, they began to change. Not because someone forced them to, not because of punishment or threats, but because they couldn't argue with what they were seeing. Scientific rigor, compassionate care, a system built not on racial supremacy, but on competence and empathy. And they couldn't deny how it made them feel, because for the first time, they were witnessing a medical system that functioned not through fear or superiority but through cooperation, integration, logic, humanity. What they saw changed them. When these nurses eventually returned to a broken, post-war Germany, they didn't go back empty-handed. They brought more than memories, they brought ideas. Ideas that would reshape German healthcare. Some became instructors, reformers. They helped establish nursing schools grounded in ethics, not ideology. They implemented blood banking. They introduced sterilization protocols. They challenged old hierarchies. They carried forward the idea that medicine should be for everyone, full stop. Their experiences in captivity didn't just reform individuals. They planted seeds that would grow into systemic change. And if you zoom out for a second, the implications are huge. This wasn't just a story about technological superiority. It was an ideological victory. A moral one. The kind you can't fake or manufacture. The kind you can only prove through action. American medical abundance didn't just save lives, it changed them. It dismantled propaganda, not by shouting over it, but by outlasting it, outperforming it, rendering it useless in the face of reality. These nurses had been trained in a system built on hate. They left that system behind not through force, but through truth. Because when you're surrounded by evidence of a better way, one that works, one that heals, one that treats every patient with dignity, beliefs start to unravel. And that's exactly what happened. A worldview collapsed. A new one took its place. It's easy to think people can't change, that indoctrination is permanent, that prejudice runs too deep. But this story proves otherwise. These women went from being foot soldiers in a racist medical regime to carriers of a completely new philosophy. One rooted in science, one grounded in empathy. All because they were exposed to a system that worked for everyone. So yeah, sometimes the biggest victories don't happen on the battlefield. Sometimes they happen in the quiet, sterile corners of a hospital, in the way a nurse changes a bandage, or offers a kind word, or shares a Christmas package with someone who used to be the enemy. And that's the legacy here. Not just antibiotics and blood banks, but the undeniable truth that medicine, when practiced with integrity and compassion, can tear down the most poisonous lies. If you found this story as powerful as we did, make sure to hit like, drop a comment, and let us know what moment stood out the most. And if you're into stories where history flips the script in the most unexpected ways, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives. The most unsettling part for the captured German nurses wasn't the equipment, or even the integration. It was how normal the American system made it all look. Like this was just how medicine should be. No ceremony, no superiority complex, no propaganda-fueled performances. Just clean halls, steady hands, and a guiding belief that everyone mattered. That belief, so simple, so basic, was absolutely radical to them. Because under Nazi rule, medicine was about control. About sorting, ranking, and eliminating. Their entire training was wrapped around the idea that some lives were worth more than others. And here they were, watching American nurses, some of them black, some Jewish, some barely older than the prisoners, treat everyone with the same urgency and care. And it wasn't just symbolic. The outcomes were real. When penicillin was administered, infections vanished. When blood transfusions were performed, soldiers lived. When sterile procedures were followed, recovery time shortened. Every act of healing was backed by science and compassion, not ideology. That was something the nurses couldn't ignore. Because for all the pride Nazi Germany took in its discipline and order, its medical system simply didn't work like this. Their hospitals were under-resourced. Treatments were reserved. Science was stifled under politics. Entire communities were denied care based on race or political affiliation. And even within the so-called Aryan population, the emphasis was on producing soldiers, not saving lives. So when these women saw the Americans working to save the wounded, any wounded regardless of uniform or background, it cracked something open. And then came the ethics. In captivity, the nurses began attending training and educational sessions. These weren't re-education camps or propaganda shows. They were serious programs focused on medical ethics, patient care, and the scientific method. What made them different was that they didn't rely on guilt or shame. They just presented the facts. Facts like, many of the antibiotics and surgical advancements they were seeing were pioneered by Jewish scientists. Scientists who had fled or been expelled by the Nazi regime. The very people the nurses had been taught to despise were behind the medicine now saving lives around them. That realization was devastating and enlightening. Because it wasn't just about being wrong, it was about recognizing that entire lives had been destroyed based on lies. The nurses weren't just learning new techniques, they were being forced to confront how much potential had been wasted, how much suffering had been caused by ideology masquerading as science. It was humbling and transformative. The educational programs also emphasized patient rights, another foreign concept. Under the Nazi regime, patients weren't people. They were data points, subjects, tools. Consent was optional. Ethics were flexible. But the American system was built differently. There were procedures, guidelines, a respect for autonomy. These weren't just rules, they were moral frameworks. And the nurses saw how that respect translated directly into trust, cooperation, and better care. They also saw how scientific method, not politics, guided decision-making. Treatments were tested. Results were recorded. There was room for error, for improvement, for learning. It was dynamic, open, honest. And that honesty was another shock. In Nazi Germany, weakness was hidden. Failures were erased. Everything was about maintaining the image of strength. But here, mistakes were acknowledged and fixed. Problems were discussed. The goal wasn't to look perfect, it was to be better. That kind of humility wasn't just refreshing. It was revolutionary. And it begged a difficult question. If this was what medicine could be, then what had they been serving all along? The cognitive dissonance was heavy. These weren't women who joined the Nazi Party out of cruelty. Most had entered medicine because they wanted to help people. But their training had funneled that desire into a twisted system that demanded loyalty to ideology over humanity. Now, for the first time, they were being shown what real medical care looked like. And not by lectures but by action. One nurse later described watching an African-American medic expertly manage a crisis in the field. The man had saved a life under pressure, with speed and skill she couldn't deny. And in that moment, she realized how absurd her training had been. That race had nothing to do with competence. That compassion wasn't a weakness. That truth didn't care about propaganda. It wasn't a dramatic movie moment. It was quiet, crushing, clarifying. The same nurse went on to train other nurses in post-war Germany, carrying those lessons with her. And she wasn't alone. When the war ended and these women returned to Germany, they brought more than war stories. They brought a different philosophy. A philosophy shaped by exposure to a better way, a way that valued every patient, embraced science, and held ethics above politics. They helped rebuild a broken system. They introduced modern sterilization practices, blood banks, patient consent procedures. They opened nursing schools focused on evidence-based care. Some even worked alongside the very refugees who had once fled Nazi Germany. And no, they didn't erase their past, but they redefined their future. Because here's the thing about ideological change, it rarely happens in loud, dramatic moments. It happens quietly, in hallways, in operating rooms, in classrooms. It happens when the facts become impossible to deny, when kindness refuses to back down, when competence outshines cruelty. That's what broke the spell. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a debate. It was a better system, performing better, for everyone. And that kind of undeniable truth doesn't just challenge belief, it transforms it. This story isn't just about medicine. It's about how exposure to something undeniably good can dismantle even the most stubborn lies. And it raises the bigger question: what happens when people are shown the truth not through punishment, but through practice? What if the best form of resistance to propaganda is simply doing things better, and letting the results speak for themselves? For those captured nurses, that answer came painfully but clearly. They had been on the wrong side, not just politically, but morally, scientifically, humanely. And what changed them wasn't guilt. It wasn't fear. It was witnessing a better reality every single day. So when we talk about ideological transformation, this is what it looks like. Not slogans, not speeches, just medicine done right. And that's the power of this story. Not just that American hospitals were better stocked or more advanced, but that they operated on a principle the Nazi regime never could understand. That healing is universal. That dignity is not conditional. That true strength lies not in domination, but in compassion guided by science. These nurses were trained in hatred, but they left their captivity carrying something else, proof that a different kind of care was possible and worth fighting for. And the thing is, it didn't take years for that realization to settle in. For many of these nurses, the shift happened fast, not because they wanted it to, but because the contrast was too stark to ignore. You can't watch someone you've been taught to hate save a life with steady hands and calm focus, and still cling to the belief that they're beneath you. You can't sit in a room full of medical supplies you were told didn't exist, watching surgeries that work, seeing infections vanish with penicillin, and still believe your side had the superior science. What broke their certainty wasn't some grand moral awakening. It was exposure. Repetition. Day after day of watching the so-called enemy care more, and do it better. And that repetition turned into re-evaluation. They had walked into captivity with the belief that they were part of a superior system, that their role in that system was noble, righteous, and essential. But they left with a deep, almost painful understanding. They had been serving a lie that twisted medicine into a weapon, that stripped people of dignity, that buried science under supremacy. The American system didn't just expose them to better tools or cleaner clinics. It exposed them to a worldview where medicine was a public service, not a state instrument, where every life, regardless of nationality or background, had inherent value. That's what stuck with them. Because even after the war, when they returned to a Germany still reeling from defeat and devastation, they couldn't unsee what they'd witnessed. They couldn't unlearn the techniques, the ethics, the sense of shared humanity. So they taught it. They rebuilt hospitals. They opened training programs. They brought the principles of patient consent, blood banking, and sterile practices into the post-war German system. They rewired what had been broken, not just with technology, but with values. These women, once trained in a system of exclusion, became voices for inclusion. Quietly, steadily, they helped turn a dark chapter into a foundation for something better. Not just what they witnessed, but what they did with it. If this kind of story hits you the way it hit us, if you believe more people should hear about moments where truth breaks through even the deepest indoctrination, then go ahead and hit like, share it, leave a comment, and definitely subscribe, because there are more stories like this where the real victory wasn't just on the battlefield, but in the minds and hearts of the people who finally saw the truth for what it was. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.